"You're not from around here, are you?" Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was a sharp edge to her words that sent a shiver down his spine. Nathan blinked, his breath fogging the frigid air as he turned to face her. Standing in the doorway of a small, glowing hut, she was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly, a shade of deep lavender that seemed to ripple under the moonlight. Her silver eyes, large and unblinking, locked onto his with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. She tilted her head slightly, her long, iridescent hair cascading over one shoulder like liquid starlight. "No," he managed, his voice cracking slightly. I'm lost. My ship." She held up a hand, a strange, almost hypnotic gesture that silenced him instantly. Her lips curved into a faint smile, but there was something unsettling about it. Not malicious, exactly, but not entirely welcoming either. "You're cold," she said matter-of-factly. "Come inside. The storm will only get worse." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to stay where he was, to turn around and find shelter elsewhere. But the biting wind and snow swirling around him made the decision for him. With a reluctant nod, he stepped forward, the alien woman moving aside to let him pass. The warmth of the hut enveloped him instantly, a stark contrast to the icy wilderness outside. The walls seemed to pulse with a soft, golden light, and the air was thick with a sweet, unfamiliar scent that made his head swim. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a low, cushioned bench near a glowing orb that hovered a few inches off the floor. Nathan obeyed, his hands trembling as he tried to shake the snow from his coat. She moved with an almost feline grace, crossing the room in a few fluid steps. Her movements were so smooth, so precise, that it was almost hypnotic. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crouched beside the glowing orb, her long fingers brushing over its surface. The light within it shifted, swirling into intricate patterns that seemed to dance in time with her movements. Finally, she looked up at him, her silver eyes gleaming. "A sanctuary," she said simply, "for travelers who lose their way." Something about her tone made him uneasy. It was too practiced, too rehearsed, as if she'd said those words 1,000 times before. Still, he nodded, his gaze darting around the room. There were no windows, only smooth, seamless walls that seemed to hum faintly. The only furniture was the bench he was sitting on and a low table covered in strange, crystalline objects that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Thank you," he said finally, forcing himself to meet her gaze, "for letting me in. I don't know what I would have done out there." Her smile widened slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of something in her expression, something dark and predatory. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him wondering if he'd imagined it. "It's not often we get visitors here," she said, her voice soft, "especially not humans. Tell me, how did you end up on this planet?" He hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But there was something about her gaze, something almost hypnotic, that made it impossible to resist. "My ship malfunctioned," he said slowly. "I was forced to make an emergency landing. The storm hit before I could figure out where I was." She nodded, as if this was exactly the answer she'd been expecting. "And you're alone?" The question sent another shiver down his spine. There was no malice in her tone, but the way she said it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Yes," he said cautiously. "It was a solo mission." Her eyes gleamed, and she leaned closer, her movements so smooth and deliberate that it felt like watching a predator stalking its prey. "You must be tired," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rest here. I'll prepare something to help you regain your strength." Before he could respond, she rose and disappeared through a doorway at the back of the hut. He sat there in silence, his mind racing. Something about this place, about her, didn't feel right. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt, as if some unseen force was keeping him rooted to the spot. Moments later, she returned, carrying a small, ornate bowl filled with a glowing, blue liquid. The scent wafting from it was sweet and intoxicating, and his stomach growled involuntarily. Drink, she said, holding the bowl out to him. It will warm you. He hesitated, eyeing the liquid warily. What is it? Her smile didn't falter. Something to help you, she said simply. Trust me. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to get up and leave. But the combination of her gaze and the overwhelming warmth of the hut made it impossible to resist. Slowly, he took the bowl from her and raised it to his lips. The liquid was thick and surprisingly cool, but as it slid down his throat, a wave of warmth spread through his body. His limbs felt heavy, his mind foggy, and before he knew it, he was slumping back against the bench, his eyelids growing heavier by the second. Through the haze, he saw her watching him, her silver eyes gleaming with an intensity that was no longer hidden. And for the first time, he realized the smile on her lips wasn't one of kindness or hospitality. It was hunger. When he woke, the hut was different. The soft, golden light had shifted to a deep, pulsating red, and the air was thick with an oppressive heat. His head throbbed, and it took a moment to realize he was no longer on the bench. Instead, he was lying on a smooth, metallic surface, his arms and legs bound by something that felt like silk but was impossibly strong. She stood over him, her iridescent hair glowing faintly in the crimson light. But she wasn't alone. 3 other figures stood behind her, each as alien and beautiful as she was, their shimmering skin and silver eyes reflecting the eerie light. They were watching him intently, their expressions unreadable. You should have stayed in the storm, she said softly, her voice carrying a strange mix of regret and amusement. It would have been kinder. Nathan's heart pounded, and he struggled against the bonds. But it was no use. What do you want from me? He demanded, his voice shaking. Her smile widened, and for the first time, he saw her teeth. Sharp, gleaming, and far too many of them. You, she said simply. Your kind is so fascinating. So full of life, of energy. It's intoxicating. One of the others stepped forward, a tall, slender figure with skin that glimmered like gold. He'll be enough for all of us, they said, their voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the air. Panic surged through him, and he thrashed against the bonds. But it was no use. The alien woman crouched beside him, her silver eyes inches from his. Don't fight, she murmured. It'll only make it worse. The walls of the hut weren't solid as they first appeared. Faint, shadowy images moved within them, as though the walls themselves were alive. Strange symbols, glowing faintly, traced patterns across the surface, and they pulsed in time with the red light. What is this place? He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The alien woman tilted her head, her silver eyes narrowing slightly. A sanctuary, as I said, she replied. But not for you. She gestured to one of the others, who stepped forward and began to adjust something on the wall. A low hum filled the room, and the symbols glowed brighter, casting strange, dancing shadows that seemed to take on a life of their own. Why me? Nathan asked, his voice trembling. What did I do to deserve this? The alien woman's smile faded slightly, replaced by an expression that was almost sorrowful. It's not personal, she said softly. We all have roles to play in the universe. Yours is simply different from what you expected. Her words only deepened his confusion. He struggled against the bonds again, his desperation mounting. You can't do this, he shouted. I'm not just some resource you can use. The golden-skinned alien stepped forward, their resonant voice calm but firm. We do not seek to harm you needlessly, human, but your kind is unique, and your energy sustains us. Without it, we cannot survive. Nathan's mind reeled. Energy? Sustains? The words felt like nonsense, but the gravity in the alien's tone was impossible to ignore. He forced himself to calm down, to think. If it's energy you need, he said carefully, there has to be another way. Take me back to my ship. I can help you find something else. A power source, maybe. Something that does not cost lives. The alien woman tilted her head, studying him as though considering his words. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her expression. Hesitation? Curiosity? But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. replaced by the same cold, predatory look. You don't understand, she said softly. It's not just energy we take. It's life essence, something no machine or power source can provide. It's unique to living beings and your species. Your species carries it in abundance. Nathan's breath hitched. Life essence? You're saying you drain it from people? Like some kind of parasite? Her lips curved into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. If that helps you understand, then yes. But it's more than that. We don't simply take. We transform. What you give becomes a part of us. It sustains us, empowers us, and kills us, he shot back, his voice filled with rising anger. You're murderers. The golden-skinned alien stepped forward again, their towering form casting a long shadow across Nathan. We are survivors, they said evenly. In this harsh universe, survival often comes at a cost. We are not the only ones who take from others. Your kind does it as well. Strip mining planets, harvesting ecosystems without thought for what you destroy. That's different. Nathan protested. We don't kill sentient beings to survive. The alien woman laughed softly, the sound like wind chimes caught in a storm. Don't you? Wars, exploitation, slavery. Your history is steeped in it. You've done far worse to your own kind than we ever could. Her words stung, but Nathan refused to back down. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify what you're doing to me. She sighed, a sound that carried a strange mixture of exasperation and pity. Perhaps not. But justification is a luxury we can't afford. The room seemed to pulse with life as the ritual, or whatever it was, continued. Nathan's heart raced as he noticed the other aliens moving around him with purpose, their hands glowing faintly as they worked. Symbols on the walls began to shift and change, forming intricate patterns that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. You don't have to do this, he said desperately, his voice hoarse. There has to be another way. Please, just let me go. The alien woman crouched beside him again, her silver eyes locked onto his. I wish I could make you understand, she murmured. This isn't cruelty. It's necessity. Without you, we'll die. Then die, he snapped, his voice filled with fury. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies. Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, pain, perhaps, or regret. If only it were that simple. As the ritual reached its climax, Nathan felt a strange warmth spreading through his body. It wasn't painful, but it was deeply unsettling, as though something vital was being pulled from him. The glowing orb in the center of the room pulsed brighter, its light growing almost blinding. Stop, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Please stop. The alien woman hesitated, her gaze flickering to the others. For a moment, it seemed as though she might actually listen. But then the golden-skinned alien spoke, their voice calm but commanding. It's too late. The process has begun. Nathan's vision blurred as the warmth intensified, spreading through his limbs and into his chest. He felt weak, his strength draining away with every passing second. But even through the haze of fear and exhaustion, he refused to give up. You don't have to do this, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. There's always another way. The alien woman stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but firm. I wish you were right. Just when he thought he couldn't hold on any longer, something changed. The glowing orb flickered, its light dimming slightly, and the symbols on the walls froze in place. The aliens exchanged confused glances, their movements suddenly hesitant. What's happening? The golden-skinned alien demanded, their voice sharp. I don't know, the alien woman replied, her tone laced with uncertainty. She turned back to Nathan, her silver eyes narrowing. What are you doing? I'm not doing anything, he managed, his voice trembling. But even as he spoke, he felt a strange surge of energy deep within him, a force he couldn't explain or control. The glowing orb flickered again, and the bonds holding him loosened slightly. The aliens moved closer, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. This isn't possible, one of them muttered. No human should be able to resist. Nathan didn't know what was happening, but he knew he had to act fast. Summoning every ounce of strength he had left, he pulled against the bonds, feeling them give way bit by bit. The warmth coursing through his body shifted, turning into a searing heat that seemed to radiate outward. "Stop him!" the golden-skinned alien shouted, but it was too late. With a final burst of strength, Nathan broke free, the bonds snapping like threads. The aliens recoiled as the searing heat erupted from him in a blinding flash of light, filling the room with an intense, otherworldly glow. The symbols on the walls shattered, and the glowing orb cracked, its light extinguished. When the light faded, the aliens were gone. Their forms dissolved into shimmering particles that hung in the air before dissipating. The hut itself seemed to crumble, the walls disintegrating into nothingness until Nathan was left standing alone in the icy wilderness. He collapsed to his knees, his body trembling as the last traces of warmth left him. The storm had passed, and the night sky was clear, the stars shining brighter than he'd ever seen. For a long moment, he simply sat there, staring up at the vast expanse of the universe. Whatever had happened, he was alive, and he was free. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning.